And a big thank you to all of our Real America's Voice viewers. Good to be back with you after a little hiatus from the hurricane. And, of course, we'll have a lot to do tomorrow. More coming your way on the radio on WGSO right here on Ringside Politics.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise. Just the News AM starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield. So glad that you're here. Well, you probably heard across the pond, the Brexit leader, Nigel Farage. He is mad as a hornet about what's happening with the lockdown. The British government is locking down the United Kingdom again because of coronavirus. Let's hear from Nigel Farage what he thinks about Boris Johnson. So let's talk about foreign policy. Now, right now in the UK, there's a lot of uncertainty. The Brexit did occur. What's the state of affairs? What's the next step for the Brexit movement?
Well, I mean, we got Brexit 31st of January, which was a miracle after years of the establishment doing their best to nullify the result. We got there. We're now coming towards the end of a very important negotiation in terms of what our future relationships are. I expect there'll be a compromise that leaves neither side entirely happy. We'll find out whether my side of the debate sees it as a betrayal or sees it as maybe the best we can do at this moment in time. The jury is out, frankly, on that. But what I will tell you for certain is this: there's no going back on Brexit. There is no reversing the Brexit vote. There is no rejoining the European Union. That bit is done. And as far as that's concerned, we've made massive progress in a few years.
Sure, you can't be a little bit pregnant. What about the question of Boris Johnson? Because it seemed pre-COVID, before he was deathly ill with COVID, he was towing the line more toward the line of China. He was thinking about giving Huawei large contracts for the British government. He gets sick, he's on death's door, and now he seems like a changed man. Where does he stand today on China and security? You've
got to understand that Boris is not really a conservative. I mean, Boris is a metro liberal. He's virtually green, more than a conservative. He and his whole family have been pro-China. You look at his brothers, sisters, father, they're all linked with China, hence the Huawei decision that he made. The reason that he's backtracked on those things isn't because he was sick with COVID, it's because the country and his own party are rebelling against the lines that he's taken. We've now had 14 identifiable U-turns that Boris has performed on policy so far this year. So we don't have strong and stable leadership. We have somebody who is really operating more on the principle of followership of what opinion polls say rather than leading. And we're kind of a year in to his premiership, and he's looking pretty uncertain in the role.
Would you ever challenge him?
Well, you see, what Americans don't understand about our system is that here you can be Donald Trump. You can run in open primaries.
Right. Well, you've got the parliamentary where your parliament will.
But we can't do that.
Right.
We can't do that. And we have the same.
Would you like to if you could?
Do there are two types of people in politics. There are those who want to be something and those who want to do something. And I came into this 30 years ago nearly. But I came into this not because I wanted rank and position or title. I came into this because I had a vision that globalism, the formation of global governments, of which the European Union was the epicenter, was the wrong way forward. I came into this to do things, to change things. That's always been my motivation, and it still is.
So you don't need to be in that role to change things?
No, absolutely not. I think to some extent I've proved that.
Sure. And what about NATO, the future of NATO? So that was one of the big things that Trump said, everyone's got to pay up.
He's right.
And the establishment said, that means he's trying to destroy NATO.
No. I mean, look, there are two things going on here. Number one, the Europeans have been taking America and to some extent the UK for a ride within NATO for far too long. And secondly, what's happening in Europe is they're trying to build their own army, their own air force, their own navy. There are people inside the Brussels machine who want to scupper NATO. All right? Now, when the Polish public wake up to this, they're going to have a very different view. And I've spoken in Warsaw, I've spoken in Prague, I've said to people, if Russia became again a serious military threat, who do you want to defend you? The Americans, the British and NATO, or a bunch of unelected bureaucrats based in Brussels who think they can fund it on a shoestring? So you've got this geopolitical development of the European Union as its own Walter Mitty superstate, and that is also impacting on NATO as well. I think what Trump has done with NATO is right. Interestingly, quite a few of them have started to spend a bit more money, and this portrayal of Trump as being the wrecker, of being the isolationist, of taking America back to a time when it didn't want to engage with the rest of the world is utterly wrong. He wants America to engage with the world, but on a fair and equal basis. And any idea that this president has been isolationist is blown away by what happened in North Korea, by the fact that we're not going into endless wars anymore, which America kept doing and we kept following and joining in with. And if you look at what's happening right now in the Middle East, with these amazing rapprochements that are being made between Israel and a series of Arab states, I would say actually that foreign policy is one of Trump's crowning achievements.
Well, he's certainly not on schedule to get any Nobel Prizes for that. In terms of the British culture and British divide, you've been crisscrossing the United States here. You've seen our divides. You've seen some people saying there might be militias, revolts in the streets, possible violence. What is the state of UK culture compared to American culture? Do you think that the UK is far more culturally cohesive in some respects because it does have a much longer history? It is more ethnically homogenous?
I would like to think so. I suspect the black-white ethnic divisions are less sharp and less intense in much of the UK than they are in parts of America. But I see the same problems. I see a liberal-led left who believe they're morally superior to those on the right. And if you actually believe that you are a better human being than somebody else, you can begin to justify in your own mind all sorts of kinds of behaviour that generally we would have found to be unacceptable. So we see the same cancel culture. We see many of the same things that you've seen in America. We've seen Churchill's statue vandalised. We've seen our national cenotaph to 1.5 million war dead defaced. We've seen statues being torn down. We've had specimens of much of the same thing that you've seen in America, but not to the same degree. But what I do think people ought to be aware of, and maybe not enough Americans, let alone Brits, are aware of, is where we are, where I'm speaking to you right now here in DC. I mean, the place is being boarded up out there in the street. And it's not being boarded up because of COVID. It's not being boarded up because no one's in town. It's being boarded up because people fear that if Trump wins the election, the left-wing mob will come out and smash the place up. Now, that is a very bad place for America to be in, for any country to be in. Here we are in the 21st century, where we now have a culture that people don't accept democratic results because they feel that they're
welcome back to Just the News AM. It's cold here on the East Coast here in D.C., but if you watch this video, and you'll see it if you go to youtube.com on the homepage, the Trump campaign has purchased, they've taken over the YouTube homepage for this song. It might warm you up. Take a listen.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Yeah, and that's a very catchy song there written by some Cuban Americans for the president. It streamed live on Facebook, and very quickly the Trump campaign saw this and snatched it up to make it into an advertisement. Now, over at our website on justthenews.com, you can read my latest piece. I looked at the momentum that the president is seeing among Latino voters, even as the Biden campaign is struggling with Hispanic turnout. Apparently, in Arizona, only two-thirds of Latinos have not even voted yet. And in Florida, the Latino and Black turnout is less than half, but more than half of white voters have voted. This is making the Biden campaign nervous. They don't think that Latinos are coming out the way they were hoping to support Joe Biden. Now, let's move here to the White House, and joining me is Jennifer Korn. She is Deputy Director for the Office of Public Liaison and Special Assistant to President Trump. She helps handle Latino affairs. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jennifer, we saw that the White House last week unveiled a plan called the American Dream Plan, specifically targeting Latino Americans. The plan is calling for 2 million new jobs for Latino Americans, 500,000 Hispanic-owned businesses, also a pledge to have a permanent solution to the DACA debate. Why is this coming now? Is this a little bit too late at this point?
Well, thank you so much for having us here to talk about the American Dream Plan, or Plan del Sueño Americano, which reaffirms the president's commitment to the Hispanic prosperity and also for opportunity for all to achieve the American dream. We have been working in the Hispanic community since day one, and I am so glad you're covering it today. I have been with the president since January 2017, and we've been able to engage with Hispanics from across the country on so many different issues. I've been in the Oval Office with him when he's talking to Hispanic small business owners about deregulation, or in the White House with Hispanic pastors about religious liberties. So there's not one issue that isn't a Hispanic issue, and that the president has put policies into place that have reflected and helped the Hispanic community. Just a few numbers for you. Pre-COVID, and these are a direct result of the president's policies, 3.9% record unemployment in the Hispanic community, a record high of median income of over $51,000, 600,000 Hispanics lifted out of poverty, and a record high of home ownership in the Hispanic community. So this is not just a plan that came just last week. This is a culmination of all the engagement and the policies we've been putting in place for the last 3.5 years.
And in terms of the Latino support for the president, we've seen that on the left, there is a lot of cries to say, oh, Trump is a racist. He doesn't care about Latinos. He just calls them rapists. He says he restricts immigration because he's xenophobic. What's your response to those claims?
Well, I'm a Latina. I'm here in the White House. We have many Latino and Latina colleagues. We have Jovita Carranza, who is a cabinet secretary overseeing the Small Business Administration. Mauricio Claver Calon, who is now heading the Inter-American Development Bank. Those are just a few that to name. We've got Hispanic support all across the country, whether it's Hispanics in Arizona or in Florida, North Carolina. One thing we have to remember about the Hispanic community, we are not monolithic, and we are definitely a group that thinks about many issues. There's not one issue that's a Hispanic issue. All issues are Hispanic issues because we are Americans. And, just from my background, my family came from Mexico. My grandfather came on the Bracero program. And my mother always likes to tell the story that the most beautiful thing to her was the American flag waving against the San Diego blue sky, and how excited she was that her shoes didn't get dusty because the sidewalks were paved over. And she instilled patriotism patriotism and a love of this country and me that we see across the country in so many Hispanics. And there are so many policies that the president has put into place, like the ones we just talked about, that Hispanics are seeing the benefit of.
And the American Dream Plan says that it wants to have a permanent solution for DACA. What is that solution?
Solution for DACA that is just and fair and one that really will benefit all Americans is something that the president has proposed, again, something that most people don't know, at least 3 different times to Congress. He said that he knew that about 600,000 had applied for the DACA program. He said, I know that there are many out there who haven't applied yet. Let's bump that number to 1.8 million. And then he said, we know that we need a permanent solution rather than just some kind of temporary visa. So he proposed citizenship. And those are the things that the president still cares about and still has advocated for. Just earlier this year, he sat with Hispanic leaders in the cabinet room and talked about DACA, and it's something that he feels very deeply in his heart, and he knows that we need to have a permanent solution.
And to this point on public perception, so I noted the poll and the momentum that it seems to be going for the president. Why do you think Latinos are going in the direction for the president, even when you have the mainstream liberal media saying all these things and saying, oh, he's this terrible racist, he's xenophobe? Why do you think the Latinos themselves are breaking in support of the president?
I think Hispanic support is because of, one, his policies. They see it in their everyday lives. They understand the economy. They understand their small businesses. They want to empower themselves to get school choice now. So there are so many policies the president has put into place that Hispanics are feeling on a daily basis, but also because of the engagement we've done. Again, it doesn't get a lot of coverage, but we have been engaging the Hispanic community since January of 2017, whether it's Cubans or Venezuelans, Mexicans, everybody we are trying to engage because the president cares about Americans all over the country, and that engagement is turning into support as we've seen for the last 3.5+ years.
You mentioned Cubans and Venezuelans. We saw during the convention speeches that many Latino Americans from these countries gave their narrative and said that they see a creep in the direction of socialism to the countries that they fled and they left behind. Are you seeing this at the White House?
Yeah, one of the tenets of the plan is preserving freedom. The United States is a free country, and Hispanics love their freedom, especially those who came from Cuba or Venezuela. They know that this president is fighting for this country to stay a democratic country, and that we are not going to go into socialism. And what other country are we going to go to? So they understand that they've lived it, and that is so important for many in our Latino community.
And last question, Jennifer, when you're looking at the next 4 years, what do you expect that the Latinos could see in a Trump White House? 15 seconds.
Well, we know that Hispanics are the fastest growing community in the country. 70,000 Hispanics turn 18 years old every day, and the Hispanic small businesses are the fastest growing businesses, especially among our Latinas. And so in this plan, we see adding 500,000 new Hispanic small businesses, adding 2 million new jobs in the Hispanic community, increased access to capital and federal contracting, empowering Hispanic parents for school choice now, and a permanent solution to DACA. And we really look forward to that future.
All right, Jennifer Corn there at the White House. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Stay with us, folks. Let's play that song one more time. Welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield. Watch this clip.
Hispanics rally to the America First movement and the re-election candidacy of President Trump. New poll out today from ABC News shows in the state of Florida 47% support among Latinos in Florida. Now, I think we're going to do even better than that, but that number likely puts the state out of reach for Joe Biden. It seems like playing Despacito on his cell phone to Hispanics wasn't exactly the right outreach. What is the right outreach? The policies of President Trump on the economy. We Hispanics are the most entrepreneurial demographic in America. We love the entrepreneur-in-chief president. Religious liberty. We tend to be heavily Catholic and evangelical. We do not want Joe Biden targeting the little sisters of the poor again. And then the Democrats dancing with socialism. People like Bernie Sanders and AOC that are largely controlling the agenda of the Democratic Party. They are unacceptable, particularly in Florida, where many Hispanics are Venezuelan and Cuban descent and understandably very afraid of the dangers of socialism. Latinos for Trump.
And that was Steve Cortes. He is with the Trump campaign talking about the state of play with Latino voters here in the United States. The president retweeted that video yesterday on his own Twitter. You can see that the battle here for Latinos is very intense. Of course, we will keep you posted on all of this. I want to put up a Bloomberg headline also on this issue. It's looking at the fact that some Biden aides are concerned. They're seeing warning signs in Black and Latino turnout so far. We'll get more into this in the show, but for now, I want to bring in Peter Navarro. He's the Director of Office and Trade and Manufacturing Policy there at the White House. He's also National Defense Production Act Policy Coordinator. Good morning, Peter.
Hey, Carrie, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us. So I know that you've spoken out about the China virus, the Communist Party of China that suppressed the truth about how this virus started. And you said in an interview with Yanya Kulik over at Epoch Times, you said that you regretted in this campaign that we were unable to punch through the mainstream media to raise awareness among the American people that this virus did indeed come from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, when you say that phrase, unable to punch through the mainstream media, what would punching through look like? What should the American people know, and what would it look like differently?
I love this question because, I mean, look, the Chinese Communist Party spawned a virus in November. They hid it for 2 months. While they were locking down their own economy to protect their own people, they sent out hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals effectively to seed and spread the virus around the world, guaranteed a global pandemic, hit New York like a tsunami, and then spread to the rest of this country. And you're not going to read about that in the New York Times or Washington Post. You're not going to see that on CNN or MSNBC. The whole game afoot here really is to blame President Trump for the virus and trying to get people angry at him instead of holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable. And I wrote an op-ed last week. I talked about the useful idiots that Marx and Lenin used to talk about, the institutions in a country that would unwittingly advance the agenda of the state. And in this case, I mean, we've seen a mainstream media totally ignore that. They're ignoring the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden crime syndicate laptop scandal, which is like the worst presidential scandal since Teapot Dome. I mean, it's like an alternate reality. And this election could have been just about the Chinese Communist Party, both on trade and on the virus, but the mainstream, I don't know what's mainstream about them, but that's what they call it. They just don't want to talk about that. They just want to do their Never Trump hate stuff on the president. Who, I mean, look, to be clear, greatest jobs president in history, greatest trade negotiator. January 2020, we had reached a pinnacle of economic success unparalleled in the last 50 years or more. And we face some hard times ahead with this virus. But unless we have a president who understands how to grow an economy, those are going to be hard times. So,
Peter, I want to ask you because you've been very
good question. But
sure, thank you, Peter. I want to ask you. So, on this question, you've been very critical of Joe Biden. I want to ask you to do a look back on the Obama-Biden years. What were the worst decisions, in your view, that were made toward China under the Obama-Biden administration?
Well, to view China basically as a friend and an ally rather than a predator. I mean, I talk about the 7 deadly sins of China, not to recognize those. It's hacking our business computers. It's stealing our intellectual property, forcing technology transfer, dumping, letting their state-owned enterprises have their way with us, currency manipulation, and killing us with fentanyl. Those 7 things, it was see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil about the Chinese. And you know who was in charge of that, some of that? Joe Biden back in 2015 over there in the Rose Garden. Xi Jinping, the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, came here, shook their hands, signed treaties, said not going to militarize the South China Sea, not going to hack our computers anymore. And you know what? Joe Biden was supposed to be the enforcer on that. He didn't enforce. And now with this laptop scandal, I think maybe we know why. But I think that was the worst mistake of many. But economically, the worst mistake was they never understood, as they were trying to recover from the financial crisis, that we faced structural problems related to trade. So all they did was throw money at it. One of my scariest statistics about Obama-Biden is we went from a $10 trillion deficit to 20 in Biden's years. They just kept throwing money at it. What President Trump has done, he believes all job creation is local. All right, so it's the tax cuts, it's deregulation, strategic energy dominance, fair trade, increased defense spending. So, I can take you across from Maine over to Minnesota, and you can see how those 5 policies help those states and how Joe Biden would unwind it. I mean, you go, for example, to Maine. Actually, defense spending helps Maine. You got the Bath Iron Works. You got Pratt & Whitney in North Berwick making auto parts for the F-35. You go to Pennsylvania, which is really going to be the battleground. We rebuilt that Philly shipyard. We saved the York Combat Vehicle Plant. We're making propellers in Newcastle for 70-foot propellers for Virginia-class subs. You go to Michigan.
Peter, I want to ask you just
General Dynamics plant.
Thanks, Peter. Just in the time we have left, how do you think the policy changes, what specific policy changes do you anticipate, 30 seconds real fast, if Biden wins, what would be the major changes you anticipate?
He'll raise taxes. He'll increase regulations. He'll do bad trade deals, globalists, send our supply chains back offshore. He'll slash defense spending, and he'll cut. He'll dry up our oil wells. Your gas prices will go up, and we'll be back in the 70s. Not a pretty picture. My forecast doesn't look too bad here. Biden cloudy with a chance of Great Depression.
All right, Peter Navarro, thank you. We appreciate it.
You take care.
Thanks. And that's Peter Navarro there talking about all things trade there at the White House. Coming up next, we've got Tom Spencer. We're going to talk about the Federal Election Commission and what does it mean for election night. Stay tuned. welcome back. We have here back with us on Just the News AM, Mr. Tom Spencer. He's Vice President of the Lawyers Democracy Fund and an election expert. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
So, Tom, let's talk about first what's happening with the Federal Election Commission. Now, if folks don't know, the FEC, as the alphabet soup goes, they're in charge of regulating elections. They're in charge of setting the rules about what's political speech and allowed, and rules around fundraising and things like that, and disclosures. The president sent over 2 nominations to the Senate just recently, October 30th. And the question is this in anticipation of something that might happen on Election Day? Is this too little too late? Or do you think these folks could have any impact on the election?
No. The answer is, Carrie, that the FEC will have no real impact on the election. It really predominantly has to do with campaign finance. And unfortunately, the FEC is one of the most dysfunctional agencies in the federal government, and it is because it's a political, very political situation where, like the Supreme Court, the nominations are really just not bipartisan. And under the rules and regulations, the president has to send in 2 nominations at a time, basically. And that is that, and one has to be Republican and one has to be a Democrat. And the Democrats in the Senate have to approve of the nominations. And so there's been a tremendous controversy with that agency, and that agency has to be reconfigured because it just politically doesn't operate. They're constantly at each other's throats on the commission, and there's a lot of politics going involved. So it's basically dysfunctional. So it will not have an impact directly on the vote count or the voting, but it may have an impact later on campaign finance investigations and prosecutions, because it will now have a full complement and the 4 commissioners necessary to operate, the quorum, so to speak.
Okay, Tom, so if that does not affect it, let's talk about something that might. I want to get your thoughts on this question of unsolicited ballots. So the president raised alarm bells. He said, for example, in North Carolina, that it seemed that there were folks who were getting many thousands of ballots that they didn't request. And even Reuters did an examination of this and found 44 million Americans, or 44 million ballots, that is, because it appears some ballots went to the same person possibly more than once, but 44 million ballots going out without being solicited, unrequested. So the big question is, what controls are there in place, or are there controls in place to stop someone if they vote in the mail through an unsolicited ballot and then they try to show up on Election Day?
Yeah, this happens quite a bit. And what happens is that when they go to vote with their mail ballot, solicited or unsolicited, there is a tracking number and there is a registration number that has to match with the records of the election department. And if they go to try to vote a second time, let's say they go to the polls to vote, they'll be blocked because that registration number has already been entered and voted. But what will happen is if they insist that they haven't voted, let's say suppose somebody stole their ballot, then they will be given a provisional ballot to vote. And then after the close of the election business, the canvassing board will then go over all of the provisional ballots to see whether those are double votes or not. And then they will count the ones that, are legitimate votes. And the provisional ballot is used not only for that purpose, but for other purposes also.
And in terms of provisional ballots, how often do they sway an election?
I can't remember an election that provisional ballots have swayed any election. I mean, it's possible in mayoral elections or small town elections that provisional ballots will sway elections. But I can't think of any major, and it's certainly not a presidential or a senatorial election, that provisional ballots have swayed an election.
Well, there's always a first for everything. We've also heard from the Trump campaign that in Florida, up to 20% of Democrats in Florida in 2016 who had a mail-in ballot actually didn't return it, that they were literally leaving votes there on the table. And apparently that number is slightly less for Republicans. It was about 15%. But still, that's a big chunk of the electorate. What happens to those votes?
They just don't get recorded or counted. And, people get ballots in the mail. There's a very aggressive program by both parties to call upon people who are registered voters to get out and vote and return their ballots, et cetera. But, some people just don't do it. It's very sad. We don't ask our citizens to do very much, but certainly voting is the most important thing that a citizen can do.
So, Tom, Election Day is tomorrow. When do you think we'll know who the president is?
I think that we'll have a pretty good idea, probably Wednesday or Thursday. And then, there's going to be a lot of sparks flying if it's close. And there are a lot of lawsuits that are going to be filed, that have already been filed. And specifically in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin. There are going to be decisions by courts that are really effective.
It could all go down to Pennsylvania. Thank you, Tom Spencer. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Stay with us. We've got an expert on the Muslim vote coming up next. And welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and glad that you are here. Let's talk about a group in America that has been a lightning rod for many people, Muslim Americans. I've got an expert here on set with me. His name is Dr. Mike Gauss. He's president of the Center for Pluralism, and he's also author of the book called American Muslim Agenda, Muslims Together Building a Cohesive America. Good morning, Dr. Mike.
Very good morning, Carrie. So good to be on your show this morning.
Thank you for being here. So let's talk about what can we expect for the Muslim vote. You did some research with your organization. I want to put up one of the polls. It's Muslim preference for Trump has increased but remains relatively low. Let's put up that chart there. We can see about how the Muslims are viewing Trump compared to other religions. We see about 30%. Oh, and now they switched it back to the one I had originally called for. So you can see in 2016, the support for Donald Trump was only 4%, and now it's going up to 14%. So it's still very low, but that's about a 10% increase. And you can see that Hillary Clinton had 40% compared to 22% for Joe Biden. So this is a very interesting growth here. Why do you think more Muslims are pro-Trump now?
Well, for two reasons. Muslims are traditionally conservative people. They believe in not in abortion and several other issues that conservatives align with. When Trump came in, they saw that he's going to respect their values, conservative values, and more and more. Then the second most important thing for Muslims was he is not out for war. He's not a war president. He's stopped the wars. There is a peace. However it is, there is peace coming in Middle East. So these two factors make Muslims like Trump a lot more, and that's why this number is gradually increasing, and it may increase more.
And you're from India, and you are a Muslim.
I am.
Trump is very popular in India, or he's very good friends with the Prime Minister there, Prime Minister Modi, who is popular. He is Hindu, though. So what is your sense among your friends and just the pulse of Muslims in India? Because a lot of them are upset at Modi because they think that he's restricting religious liberty. Do they associate that with Trump?
Unfortunately not. There are two different issues there. And again, all Muslims are not Indian Muslims in the United States. Majority of the Muslims are African American. 33% of them are African American Muslims. Then some Arabs, and bulk of them are from Asia, South Asia. What's happening in India is very sad, very unfortunate. The RSS is like Hitler's organization, Nazi organization, and they are doing a lot of damage. They have given ultimatum to Muslims and Christians, very importantly Christians, that by the year 2021, get the hell out of India, or convert to Hinduism, or live as second-class citizens. And that is really going to happen, and there is going to be a genocide going to happen in India. We are urging Trump to take a stand on it, stop this, and let people be treated equally, equal opportunities, equal justice for all in India as we do in America. We hope Mr. Trump does that.
Well, and certainly the president talks often about religious liberty and protecting religious practitioners. For example, we just heard a clip from a Latino supporter for Trump saying that Latinos are deeply Catholic, and because of religious freedom issues, that's why they support the president. But I want to put the next slide up about Muslim approval of the president among other religious groups. If we can put that graph up to see how does he compare with some of the other religions. He's 30% approval rating. Let's put that graph up. 30% approval rating among Muslims for President Trump, and it's pretty low compared to the other groups. Jewish 34%, Catholic 44%, Protestant 46%, white evangelical 70%, non-affiliated 23%, 39% of the general public. So it looks like only among those who are non-affiliated, typically atheist or agnostic, they're the only group who views Trump less than Muslims. Why is that?
Well, the Muslims, when he announced the Muslim ban before the election, that started rolling down the numbers.
Can I ask you a question on this? Because the way that the Trump administration has talked about it, he says this is not a Muslim ban, this is a terrorism ban, that the, more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, that only a small fraction of the Muslim majority countries were banned, and they were terrorism. So do you think people are mixing those two to say this is a Muslim ban compared to what Trump says this is a terrorism ban?
I think actually Trump did not communicate well with the American public. He banned certain people coming to enter from the United States, not all the Muslim countries. He did not clarify that. It is the radicals that he did not want to come into the United States. But those who are here, he had no problems with them. American Muslims don't have any problem with his ban because it is not affecting any one of us. So it is the miscommunication on the part of President Trump's, I need to be his press secretary.
And let's pull up the last slide here. Muslims are more likely than the general public to be satisfied with the direction of the country, which is very interesting. So looking at how 37% of Muslims say that they are satisfied with the direction of the country, only 27% of the general public say that they are satisfied with the direction of the country. Why are Muslims more satisfied? 20 seconds.
Once again, the peace action and not having a war in the Middle East, that's one. Not killing Muslims in the name of whatever the reason. So many millions of people we killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Trump has not done that. And that is one of the reasons that Muslims are moving towards him.
Do you think he's going to win in any states? Do you think Muslims could be a hinge point for him in any district or state?
Well, in Texas, Muslims are going both sides, like 30% of Muslims are out there. And same thing in New Jersey and Florida.
All right.
So
thank you, Dr. Mike. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be right back. morning and welcome back to Just the News AM. Thanks for being with us here on the ride. Well, November is the National Diabetes Awareness Month, and the president took note. He put a proclamation, he released a statement on National Diabetes Month for 2020. He said that throughout National Diabetes Month, we reaffirm our continued efforts to discover better solutions for the more than 34 million Americans living with diabetes today. Facing the threat of diabetes head-on, particularly in our aging population, is a top priority of my administration. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 1 in 10 Americans have diabetes, and approximately a third are pre-diabetic, meaning they're at a high risk of developing it. Now, that pre-diabetic group is important because a lot of folks might not even know that they are at risk for it. They might not know that they have some of the factors or the characteristics, and they might not even know the diet risks or the proactive things you can do from diet and exercise perspective to prevent you from getting diabetes. So in the month of November, do yourself a favor, check into your health on diabetes. We heard from an expert last week talking about how Americans are more eating at home, they're cooking more at home, which means they're eating more healthy. That's the hope, at least. So we're hoping here for National Diabetes Month, for the month of November, that folks will pay attention to the risks. They will make sure that they are supporting people around them who are suffering from diabetes. Be empathetic, ask them questions. How can you offer support to them? Our thoughts are with all of those folks. And we want to thank you for joining us here this morning on Just the News AM. Stick around here next. We don't want to miss, of course, more room.